I'm Lucy Organ. I'm from 6KBW College Hill. I'm a barrister. I'm about 10 years cool. I was called in 2006. In terms of the work that I do, I mainly prosecute and defend in crime. I probably have about a 60% prosecution. The rest is defending. I also do a little bit of civil and public law work, a little bit of immigration, a little bit of regulatory work.
So I'm Ed Connell. I was called in 1996, so 20 years this year. I'm at 5 St Andrews Hill, which formerly used to be 2 High Court buildings, traditionally prosecution set of chambers, which now prosecutes and defends, and does other areas of law. My practice is very similar to Lucy's in that I am 60% prosecution, 40% defence, and for the last 7 years I've sat as a recorder, so as a part-time judge in the Crown Court. So it's exclusively crime that I do.
I don't know who wants to start.
I'll happily go ahead. So I've been given some general ideas as to what I should talk about. So let me then begin by saying as to why you should choose the bar. I'm one of those people that when you speak to, enthuse about their job. You ask a lot of your contemporaries about what they're doing in their work, and they'll tell you that it's work, and they do work to earn money. But when you're a barrister and a criminal barrister, it's great fun. And I know a lot of people sort of speak and talk about the doom about the criminal bar and saying there's not enough money there and it's dying. Well, that's not been my experience. In terms of a job, it's superb because it's so diverse. You're doing different things every day, every week, different people, different cases, different personalities, different venues. And so that's the real positive about it. How did I end up being a barrister? Well, I was at university studying French and geography. And like many people trying to work out, well, what are my skills and what are they best going to be suited towards? And I wanted something that's going to challenge me intellectually, but I also thought my skills were in public speaking. So I enjoyed things like debating, mooting, acting. And so the bar was a sort of very obvious choice because it does give you that intellectual challenge, but it means you can use your advocacy skills every day because you're in court every single day. So that's what I decided to do, and I did the law conversion course and started doing crime. If you choose a career at the bar and you're thinking about what area of law you want to go into, well, if you want to do advocacy, then crime is the natural choice. Because unlike other areas of law where you're trying to do your best to avoid going to court, in criminal law, you're going to be in court every single day of your career, pretty much. So unless you're sort of very keen on being an advocate and you're confident about speaking in public and thinking on your feet, then criminal law is not going to be really for you. Well, what sort of cases do criminal barristers deal with? Well, the reality is every type of crime that you can think of. We cover the Magistrates Court, the Crown Court, and up to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. Most of the work that I do now is in the Crown Court. And so that means that I'm doing a fairly diverse workload. Sexual offences, because over 40% of criminal trials in the UK now are sexual offences. So if you're one of the people who've been specially trained as a CPS prosecutor to do sexual offences, you're doing quite a bit of that. I do that when I sit as a recorder because I've done the sexual offences training. So I'm doing a lot of those sorts of offences at the moment. But other than that, I do pretty much everything. So you're talking about serious violence, drugs, kidnap, the whole spectrum of criminal offences. And you'll probably find that most criminal barristers at an early stage will be trying to do a bit of diverse work to boost their income. So they'll use their skills to maybe do some things like extradition work or things like that. And as you go up your career, if you want to diversify a little bit, there's scope to do that as well because you have things like regulatory work as well, which involves advocacy skills. And so it's a good sort of crossover. So those are the sorts of cases that I do. I've already sort of touched upon why I love my job. I mean, you can't really explain the thrill and adrenaline rush you get from cross-examining somebody when you've got some good things to work with. Closing speeches, big adrenaline rush. And it's a real sort of high and lows career because you have to go from the highs of success, the lows of defeat. And that is something which you need to be able to work with. And in a moment, I'll sort of touch upon the sorts of skills I think that criminal barristers need to have, but you have to have that ability to be robust. I think also, as I've also touched upon, is the real variety of work that you get to do. I mean, if you want the idea of being in the same office, dealing with the same people every day for the rest of your working career, That's all well and good, but that really wasn't for me. I love the fact that I'm my own boss, I shape my own career, and I get to just do a very varied workload, and I can determine where that workload takes me and in which direction I go. It's not an easy job. I don't think being a barrister is an easy job no matter what field you're in, but in terms of criminal law, it's a bit unpredictable. You'd never know exactly when a case is going to finish. You never know when you're going to be given your next case. So it's not unusual for you to finish a trial at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At 6 o'clock, you're giving a few lever arch files and told you're starting another trial the next day. And that obviously has some certain consequences because when you're planning a social life, unfortunately, that sometimes has to take a back seat because if you've got tickets for the theatre and the clerks come and say to you, you're starting a fraud tomorrow, it's had to be returned to you because so-and-so stuck in a trial, you can't just say, oh, well, tough luck, I'm going to the theatre. You'll spend your night and probably most of the night working on it so you're ready the next morning. And you do have to have a degree of flexibility because you'll be sent to work probably all over the place, although you might be practicing primarily in London and the South East. It won't be unusual for your clerks to send you off to Manchester or to Lincoln. And again, that is a bit of a problem for your social life because it's all well and good saying to your friends, well, let's meet for dinner at 6 o'clock in the city when you finish at court at 4:30 in Manchester and then your client wants to see you in the cells for 45 minutes. So it does have an impact upon your lifestyle to a certain degree. But I hope the point you're getting from what I'm saying is I can't tell you how much fun I have doing this job. Sometimes you have to kick yourself and think, blimey, someone's actually paying me to do this. I mean, it really is such a great thrill to do the job. So what are the sorts of skills that you need to have if you want to be a criminal barrister? Well, I think probably very obvious, you need to have advocacy skills. If the thought of standing up in front of a room full of people and talking leaves you sort of shaking at the knees, then that's not the job for you because you spend your job as a criminal barrister in court every day and you earn a living by your ability to be an advocate. So you need to be able to do that. You also need to be able to think on your feet and because you will have to think on your feet and respond on your feet to often complex legal arguments and sometimes just factual changes when a witness changes their account. You need to be able to work on your own and be able to sort of timetable your life around your work. And I suppose probably the most important skill I'd say for a criminal barrister is communication skills. Because you have got to communicate with everybody. And that's how you're earning your living, your ability to communicate and communicate well. But it's not just, I think when people think criminal barristers, they think, oh, they have to be a good jury advocate. They have to be able to give good closing speeches and convince juries. Well, obviously that's an element of it. But there's a lot more to it than that. You have to have a good relationship with your clerks because they're very much shaping your career. You need to have an ability to be able to empathise with your lay client, somebody you may have absolutely nothing in common with at all, may come from a very different background to you, and they may be involved in crimes that, from a personal perspective, you find very difficult to grapple with. But you're going to have to be able to work with them and earn their trust. You're going to have to be able to deal with your colleagues. You have to be able to deal with judges and be able to deal effectively and argue the law and make coherent submissions. And you have to be able to develop professional relationships with your solicitors, whether it be prosecution or defence, because that's part and parcel of how you get your work, by being as effective outside of court as in court. So communication really is the key. So again, if the idea of having to walk into a courtroom, never having met your lay client before, or going down to the cells to see somebody that's sort of had a long-standing drug habit, and it's going to be very difficult to get their trust, and the idea of actually having to go meet a stranger in those circumstances frightens you or makes you a little bit scared, then again, that's not the job for you. And I think probably the final thing I would say is you've got to be pretty robust. It's a tough job. It's a tough job mentally. It's a tough job physically. It's very demanding. There's an emotional involvement. It's very difficult. You're trying to be dispassionate and to perform your role without getting involved in things. But that can be very difficult when you're defending somebody charged with very serious crimes for whom there'll be significant consequences if they lose. So you've got to be able to deal with that. You have to be able to deal with the very highs and the lows of the job. There are days when you will get shouted at by judges and you'll go home and you'll feel pretty terrible. And there'll be times when you go home and your client's been convicted, and again, you'll feel pretty terrible about it. But unless you have that ability to be able to get up the next morning and apply yourself professionally to the next job, then again, this job isn't for you. And there are obviously highs as well. That those occasions when you mitigate on behalf of somebody who's on the edge of a prison sentence and who doesn't go to prison because of what you said and how you said it, is again another high that you really can't describe to somebody. You're making a real impact on people's lives, and that again is probably one of the reasons why I love what I do. So I hope that gives you a bit of an overview, and I'll hand over to Lucy.
I'm quite like Ed. I was at university, I did a history degree, I didn't do a law degree, and I had been, as a teenager, obsessed with legal dramas. It's sad to say, but I was, and I had no legal background in my family or in friends, but I just decided, I don't know where it came from, that's what I wanted to do. I mean, some people have said to me, well, you've got a highly developed sense of fairness, and maybe that's where that's come from, I don't know. But I decided at about 15 that I wanted to be a barrister, and I, unlike all of you, wasn't particularly well informed, and to me being a barrister just meant being a criminal barrister. I made the right decision because what I love about my job is really stories and people. I think I'm innately nosy, and what I get to do is be involved in people's lives in a very limited way, but I am at important points. And I enjoy that. I enjoy the intellectual rigour. People often say, well, crime isn't really law, but it is. There is law involved. And when you're arguing difficult points in front of a judge or you're doing appellant work, that's challenging intellectually. When something happens and you're on your feet, as Ed says, a problem occurs, you've got to be able to deal with it there and then. You can't say, well, you might say, can I have half an hour? But you can't say, oh, can I go away overnight and think about that necessarily. You have to be able to deal with it, be able to reason through the problems that you're having. So I chose crime sort of by luck, but it was, as I say, the right decision for the reasons that I've set out. I also think that crime is a very good area of law if you're interested in actually doing other areas of law. As Ed says, lots of young barristers, and I still consider myself to be a young barrister, will look at diversifying slightly, doing quasi-crime, doing extradition work, doing regulatory work, doing immigration work, doing a little bit of civil work that spins out of criminal work. And I do bits of work like that. And something that is often valued in criminal practitioners, what criminal practitioners have that maybe other practitioners don't have in abundance, is advocacy skills, the ability to cross-examine, the ability to give closing speeches, opening speeches, or be in the Court of Appeal and be very persuasive on their feet. And that can be a skill that can be transferred to other things, obviously, as well as obviously doing written work. What types of cases do barristers deal with? Well, as Ed says, we deal with crime. That's obvious. Nearly everyone knows in this room what crime is, but it's a full gamut. It might go from prosecuting somebody who's giving immigration advice when they're not entitled to do so, to someone that is said to have murdered somebody. It might go from dealing with somebody who's said to have been speeding and might lose their license and they're a professional driver when you're at the start of your career, to prosecuting someone who's killed someone while driving. It really is that broad, and at my stage at least, I'm still going up and down that calendar of offences very frequently. What do I find appealing? As I said, I'm nosy, I like the stories, but I also like the excitement, the adrenaline, the nerves. I don't like it when I'm on my way to court, but it's addictive and it's a cycle, because you get up in the morning and you think, I don't want to go and do this is going to be difficult, but you do, and then it works or it doesn't work, and then you come out and you think, that was brilliant, I want to do it again. So I think it's like a roller coaster that you get on, and it's very difficult to get off. I think the adrenaline is a real positive for me, but I think you have to consider what kind of a person you are before you decide to pursue a career like this, because for some people it's just impossible to deal with the challenge of daily being very nervous, or feeling frightened or scared, or being shouted at by a judge. For some people that just is not appealing and not something they can deal with. And so robustness was a word used by Ed, and I use the word grit. I think you have to have grit in the job that we do. There's lots of insecurity. You don't necessarily know what you're going to do from day to day. There's financial insecurity, certainly at the start. It's difficult. You might be carrying quite a lot of debt. and you come to the bar and publicly funded work is challenging, particularly when you're new at the bar, and so you're doing magistrates court trials and they're not particularly well funded. And even if you start to prosecute for the CPS, doing a list at the magistrates court isn't particularly well funded, and you have to also be self-motivated because you have to make sure you do the work. Not hard when you're going to be in front of a judge the next day, but might be difficult if you've got a longer running case and you need to do a certain number of hours on it a week, for instance. I say that because that's a situation I find myself in. The other thing that's self-motivated is that, of course, you have to balance the books. Because we are generally self-employed as barristers, we have to deal with our own tax affairs, with VAT, and you also are responsible for effectively yourself as your own business. So Ed said one of the important things is relationships, and part of that is because you have to go to court and you have to relate to your client, relate to the judge, relate to counsel on the other side, relate to your professional client, relate to the jury, very important, relate to the usher who's going to help you get on first, maybe. But also, part of the modern criminal bar, I think, is about publicising yourself and your chambers and making sure that you are getting the kind of work you want to get. It's very competitive at your stage, and I'm afraid to tell you it doesn't stop. It's very competitive on an ongoing basis. And so you need to be self-motivated. You need to be able to be that person that will reach out to solicitors, will reach out to other areas, might think, well, let's see what HMRC are doing, or let's see what the Competition and Markets Authority are doing. Let's give myself other skills that might make me attractive to other people. Lifestyle implications, well, the obvious ones have been covered. One thing I would say is that obviously there'll be times when you are going to have to work at night or at the weekends. Antisocial hours certainly are part of our job. On the other hand, you are self-employed, and so sometimes, as happened to me on Monday, a trial that was listed for 5 days goes short, and you have an afternoon at your disposal, and you can decide what you do with it. Now, you can be good and you can go back to chambers and get on with the paperwork that you should be getting on with, or you can go swimming. You can do whatever you like. You're self-employed. So there are pros and cons to everything, I suppose, and the advantage of being self-employed is exactly that. You are self-employed and you make your own decisions. You decide if you want to go on holiday or not. You decide not necessarily how much work you're going to take, because certainly the clerks have an impact on that, but what you're going to do with your time and when you're going to work. And it might be that you're not very good at working on a Friday afternoon, and so you live with that and you do something else with your Friday afternoon and you work on a Sunday instead. That might just be the life decision you take. A number of people have asked me today, I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, but whether it's possible to have children in this job, and it definitely is. In my chambers, everybody that wants to have children, not that I know of, has children, and a number of very senior women have children. There's silks in this profession that have children. I'm not saying it's easy. I have no idea how they do it, but it's obviously possible, because court generally sits from 10 till 4:30, and while you might have to work outside that, and you certainly need help with childcare, it's possible. That's really what I'm saying to you. Don't be put off thinking, I can't go to the bar, I can't be a criminal practitioner because I want to have a family, because that would not be a bar to you coming to the criminal bar. Key skills and personal qualities. Well, as Ed said, an ability to relate to people, clearly an ability to speak in public, be persuasive. I think grit is very important. Integrity is key. You sometimes are put in very difficult positions where there might be all sorts of competing interests. Your own interests, the interests of your client, financial interests, and you have to learn to make the right decision ethically. And you need to learn to do that from the beginning. And so integrity is key to the way that you conduct yourself in everything. At the bar generally, I would have thought in life generally, but particularly at the criminal bar, where you're dealing with those that are said to have transgressed the criminal law, and so you don't want to feel that you have any hypocrisy in that, but also because we have a rigorous code of conduct that has to be complied with. And I think that, I've never done anything else, but I think at the criminal bar there's very challenging things that come up in relation to ethics, that come up from nowhere. You might go to court and your client says something to you in a conference room and suddenly you're in a very difficult position and you need to learn how to deal with that. Often that means taking advice from others in chambers or the Bar Council, but learn how to deal with that. The final thing that I think is very important is calmness. I think an ability to deal with stress and with pressure, because stress and pressure is certainly part of being a barrister and certainly part of our job at the criminal bar. And you need to either have the kind of personality that just can deal with that, or learn how, with your personality, you can deal with it. Because you need to be able to, if at 8 o'clock you've done all your work and you're at home, switch off from it. Because otherwise you're going to live and breathe it. And I think there's potential to burn out if you live like that.
I think you've actually reminded me of one other skill, which we've kind of touched upon anyway, but is judgment. You do have to have good judgment, and as Lucy said, you're often put into situations where there are these competing interests, and you have to have that innate sense of knowing what the right thing to do is, because there won't always be people to turn to ask for advice. I mean, the bar is very good in that respect, that if you need help, and you're at court and you have a problem, you can pretty much turn to anybody and ask them for their advice and they'll give it to you. That's the great thing about the bar. It's very close like that. We work together a lot. But you do often have to make those decisions. You have to have an innate sense of knowing what is the right thing to do. And you'll often be faced with a lay client who won't know what they should be doing. And they'll be looking for you for guidance. And so if you're the sort of person that is unable to make decisions, tactical decisions, or any sort of judgment decisions, if you find those sorts of things a real problem, then I suspect that being a criminal barrister is probably not going to be for you.
Yeah, I would agree with that, definitely. I think, and sometimes also confidence, because taking decisions, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a right decision, but sometimes you just have to take a decision. And one thing I find interesting when I've done other things that haven't been sort of criminal bar related is that I forget that we take decisions often, obviously, with our client. We're not just there saying, right, we're going to do this, right, we're going to do that. But other times you're cross-examining a witness and something happens, and on your feet you have to make a decision about what you're going to do next in the best interests of your client. And so I think you have to often have confidence in yourself. I think that applies to the application process. I know it's challenging, I know it's competitive, and so if you really, really want to do this, you have to have confidence that you will be able to do it. But then in court, you have to have confidence that you can stand up and do this, and then if you make a decision, you have to have confidence that it's the right one and follow it through. I think that's another important quality.
Thank you. That's a really good tip to end the main part of the talk. But can I now open the floor to questions, please? Can you put your hands up if you have a question for our panel? And I'm sure I can't quite see everybody, but yes, at the back there, please.
I know a barrister who practices both in criminal and family. I don't know if you know any other barristers who do a similar thing, practicing in different sort of sectors. But if you do know any, how do you know how they've gone about that and getting the mixture?
Well, there are, my chambers were traditionally, as I said, a prosecution set, but that's changed quite a lot over recent years. And you very much shape your own destiny, really, when you're at the bar. And from the day you become a tenant, you can control really what you want to do. And you'll probably find that your clerks will be very supportive of you if you say to them, look, I know I've done a criminal pupilage, but actually I want to do a bit of family, or I want to do some extradition work. And they will probably sit you down and work out how you can best go about doing that. There are lots of people in my chambers that do different areas of law who aren't doing exclusively crime. And they do it for different reasons. Sometimes it's for financial reasons. As I say, at the bottom end, the money, as Lou said, isn't particularly good anymore for junior barristers in crime. It is a financial challenge. And so people look to do other areas of law to support that. So the natural things that they do are sort of low-level sort of civil work, for which you can get sort of money for doing the paperwork, extradition work you can do, and then there's also some family work. So it's certainly achievable. You're obviously going to be better able to do that in a chambers which does more than just one area of law, because obviously if you're in a criminal set of chambers and you want to do a bit of family as well, it's going to be difficult for you, because you need a support network around you. And although you might want to branch out and do some family by yourself and start making some contact with solicitors, you need to have a clerking team that can deal with it. You need to be able to have people that can cover your work when you can't cover it, because solicitors will very quickly become frustrated if the times you're not available, there's no one in your chambers who can cover you. So in a chambers where there's sort of other areas of work that you want to do, that's going to be a real advantage. And you'll find that now that there are lots of chambers that maybe once were exclusively criminal that will do crossover work. So, as I say, the areas of law that my chambers does in the last 10 years has changed significantly. I mean, we do international family, extradition, civil, a lot of sort of asset forfeiture stuff, all the regulatory stuff as well. So there's the real scope in a chamber like ours to do that, and I think the same can be said of sort of many chambers that perhaps once were exclusively criminal.
I mean, I think there's been lots of diversification at the criminal bar. That's part of what I was saying about our skill set being translatable into other areas of law. I suppose if you wanted to combine family with crime, you would ideally need to find a set that had both represented, because I think it would be difficult to go it alone, so to speak, or to create a family practice when there wasn't one in chambers. But there certainly are chambers out there that do both those areas of law, and that would I can think of one off the top of my head that has a bit more of a mixed common law approach, but does crime as well. And so you would do, in a pupilage, you would do seats in different areas, and then presumably decide on your practice if you were taken on. But yes, at my chambers, we have diversified. We still do predominantly crime, that's right, but we do regulatory work, we do extradition, confiscation, which is, that's criminal really. I do a bit of immigration. I do a bit of civil law work. We're sort of able to turn our hands to things once you've got the grounding. But our pupilage is predominantly a criminal pupilage. And public law. We do a lot of public law.
Thank you. Good question. There's a question in the back there, then I'll come to you next.
Right. How many years does it take for us to establish this practice?
It can happen very quickly. I've known some very enthusiastic, hard-working pupils that have developed a strong solicitor following within a couple of years of being on their feet. And the reason why they got that was because they were working very hard to generate their own sort of advertising, because one of the things that happened is the days of where your clerks used to create your practice for you have gone now. The bar's a very different place, and so you are having to go out there and market yourself. And so it's all about how much time and effort you want to put into that practice. And it is hard work, because that'll involve you having to, in addition to doing your work, you will have to go that extra mile in terms of forging relationships, going out on social occasions to meet solicitors, offering to help out in other areas of law that perhaps you don't normally do to try and help out a solicitor. So it's all about how much effort you want to put into it. But there's no doubt at all that you can establish a strong practice very, very quickly if you're enthusiastic.
Thank you. We had a question just here.
What were your experiences of gaining pupilage, and do you have any advice for this?
So I'm chair of the Pupilage Committee at St Andrews Hill, so I see 400 applications each year and then interview 60 people each year. So I hope I'm in a fairly good position to tell you what we look for. With my own experience, getting called in 1996, back in the days of unfunded pupilages, I did an unfunded pupilage. That was the norm back then. There'd be lots of pupils in chambers, no one would be getting any money for the first 6 months. And then when it came to trying to get tenancy at the end, it was a bit of a bun fight, because lots of people were trying to get those elusive 1 or 2 spaces. And it was difficult, because I was, like Lucy, first person in my family to go to university, no lawyers in my family at all. Trying to get mini pupilages was a nightmare, because I didn't know any lawyers. So I was applying and I was struggling to get them. And it was tough. And all I ever wanted was the opportunity to get an interview somewhere, because I felt if I got an interview and I got knocked back, that's fine. They've seen me, have assessed me, and I'm not going to fit in there, or I'm not good enough. That's all in good, but I just want to get interviews. And so I managed to get a few interviews, and I was obviously lucky enough to end up getting pupilage. But I think that you create your own success. I mean, I got my opportunity for pupilage, and I worked damn hard at making sure that at the end of the year, people wanted to take me on. And Pupilage was a very, very difficult year. I don't think it ever worked so hard in my life. I constantly went the extra mile because I knew that I needed to impress pretty much everybody in Chambers. At the end of the year, they'd all be saying, well, we can't imagine life in Chambers without Ed being here. So it's difficult and it's really, really hard. In terms of what we look for, it's incredibly difficult, and I sympathise with all of you because the difference between who gets an interview at our Chambers and who doesn't is often very slim. The margins as to who gets the offers in the end from those we interview, again, can be very, very slim. Everybody has done brilliant things, has great academics, has done loads of work experience, and it's tough. It really is tough. What I try and encourage people to do is I say to them, look, if you're coming to our Chambers, you need to show us that you're dedicated towards a career at the bar, and in particular a career doing crime. And if you apply to us, you've done 9 mini pupilages in a construction set, and you've never done any crime, I know straight away that it's going to be a waste of time interviewing you. So I'm looking for the people that have done as much work experience as they can get. Now, we recognise that some people might be paying their way through bar school and have to work in their holidays and can't afford to do mini pupilages, and that's all in good. We understand that. But what we do say to people is you've just got to do what you can to enhance your CV and show why you're dedicated. That might be just going on the rare one day off you get to go and sit and watch court. It might be just working during one summer in a solicitor's firm. It might be offering your service as citizen's advice. It might be helping out a legal advice centre. So it's just all about trying to get as much on your CV as you can to demonstrate that you recognise that this is the area of law you want to go into. And one final thing I'd say about it is I think it's helpful to have done not just criminal mini pupilages, because it's very easy if you say to somebody, well, how do you know you want to be a criminal barrister? Or why don't you want to be a solicitor? You can do advocacy as a solicitor. And the best answers always come from the people that have experienced those other areas of law and say, well, I did a 2-week vacation scheme at a city law firm, and I tell you for X, Y, and Z reasons why it's not for me. I did in-house, or I went to a solicitor's firm that does crime, and I can tell you, X, Y, Z were the reasons why that's not suited to me. Those are the people that give the most compelling answers. So it's just doing everything you can to get your CV as best you possibly can. I know it's difficult. Not everybody has the same opportunities as other people, but we're just looking for people that have demonstrated that they want to be a criminal barrister, because it's tough, and so you have to try really, really hard, and it's not just about academics. We're looking for people that demonstrate they've got a life as well. I mean, people who come to us, you'd be surprised how many. When you sit there at the end of an interview and say, well, what do you do in your spare time? They say, I read. And that's all they say to you. Hopeless. That's all well and good, but the ability to read a book is nowhere near as good as somebody that volunteers at a home, or does volunteer work, or sits on a committee for whatever sport they do, or plays team sports, or climbs Kilimanjaro. Those are sorts of things that build character, and you need a lot of character at the criminal bar. And so I'd say enhance your CV, not just academically, but and not just in terms of legal experience, but also other things that show that you're a well-rounded person.
In terms of my experience, I was lucky enough to be offered pupilage. I think when I was doing what was the CPE, which I think now is the GDL. Unfortunately, the struggle does not stop there, and I didn't get taken on at my first set of chambers, and I then did a third six, so probably not what you all want to hear, but as Ed has said, pupilage is very, very challenging for a number of different reasons. You're working very hard, it's a year-long interview effectively, and you are also trying to learn how to be a barrister, which is not easy in itself. You're trying to impress all these people with your skeleton argument on a difficult point in the Court of Appeal, while also trying to appear in the Magistrates' Court and learn how to cross-examine someone. So, there's lots going on, and it's challenging. In terms of what we're looking for, I am also on the Pupilage Committee in my chambers. I'm the secretary at the moment. And we sift, like Ed, a huge volume of applications. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. It's very competitive. I see that. We are looking for academics. I'm not going to pretend we aren't. This is an intellectual job, and it's difficult and it's rigorous. And so we're looking for those that have demonstrated their intellectual ability, but we're also looking for, like Ed, proven interest and commitment to the criminal bar or public law. We're also looking for advocacy. Now, when I say advocacy, clearly you're not going to have done a magistrates court trial, or you may have done, but you're unlikely to have done. But people that have gone out there and looked at areas that they can use and explore, mooting, debating, public speaking. Some people are in their local amateur dramatics group, and they're able to have the confidence to get up in front of people and do Othello. Or the other thing that we look at is what people have been doing with their time, law clinics, bar pro bono unit, all of those things. And they're all the things that I did too. I mean, I volunteered at a law clinic when I was a student. I did mini pupilages, I did assess mini pupilages, and I think Ed's advice about going to look at other things is very important. I went and did a Magic Circle internship, and I realised their canteen is amazing, but this is not for me. And I went to and I did a family law, assess mini pupilage. I went to, I think, a tax set, and it did mean that in interviews when people said to me, why the criminal bar, it wasn't just the positives of the criminal bar, it was also that I've looked at other things, and I know that they're the advantages. If I went and did a tax pupilage, I would think I would have been paid about 7 times as much, but I knew I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to sit at a desk just drafting things, and I wanted to be interested in what I was doing. So that's the advice I would give.
Thank you. I reckon we've got time for one more question. So as your hand went up first, you get it.
So obviously in the last few years, the criminal bars have done a significant amount of change by way of fees. What do you think are the changes that are occurring on the horizon in the next few years?
For the criminal bar?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, firstly, insofar as the change that we've undergone in the last few years, I personally don't think they're quite as bad as people have made them out to be. There's no doubt at all that starting out the criminal bar now is much more difficult than it was, and the funding and the levels of pay at the bottom end are not good, and the opportunities to do as much magistrates work has unfortunately declined. So it is definitely more difficult to start with, but I'm not going to sit here and say to you, you can't make a good living at the criminal bar, because I'd be lying if I said that, because you can. I mean, it's still publicly funded work, so you have to have an expectation that you're not going to be earning the same money as your contemporaries were at law school, who now be working in sort of Magic Circle firms. You're never ever going to be on a par with them, but you can make a good living. I think that we are, as things stand, in a fairly stable situation. I don't see any major problems on the horizon with the criminal bar. I think that, if anything, what happened over the last few years when there was concern about the future is it kind of sifted out the people that really weren't dedicated, because the people that were maybe umming about, well, should I be a criminal barrister, faced with those problems, have probably gone off and done other things now. And I think that we've been left with a slightly reduced number of people practicing criminal law, but they're the people that are actually good at it and are going to be able to make a career out of it. So I'm not concerned about the future, and I think the reality is it sounds very cliche to say it, but if you're confident in your abilities and you're good enough, you'll succeed. And it's never ever, as I keep saying, going to be that the area of law in which you're going to make huge amounts of money. And people sometimes say about the criminal bar sometimes is a bit sort of a vocation, a bit job, and I think there is an element to that as well. But I'm personally confident about the bar's future, certainly the criminal bar's future. I don't have any concerns about the foreseeable future.
I don't either. I actually think there's been a bit of a bounce back, if anything. I think there was a trend maybe 5 to 6 years ago of people going in-house, and a trend towards the CPS having in-house lawyers, and then obviously defence solicitors having in-house barristers, or in-house solicitors that had higher rights of audience. I actually think I've noticed, at least, that there's been a sway away from that and back towards the bar. I think that we are properly an expert referral profession, and people recognise that if you're going to have a trial for murder, you want to be represented by someone from the bar who's been doing it for 25 years and who is an expert in what they do. One positive thing that I think has come out of the sort of challenge to the criminal bar is what both of us have spoken about, which is chambers thinking a little bit outside the box. I think if you went to my chambers 10 years ago, there would have been lots of people at the Bailey doing murders, but there wouldn't be very many people that did anything else, really. It would be pure criminal work. Now, for some people, that's challenging because they just want to do pure criminal work. But personally, I found that it's interesting and it keeps you interesting. And if you're if you're going to have a long career at the bar, you may want to try your hand at something not completely different, but at a tangent that keeps you thinking, keeps you intellectually challenged by things. So I think one of the good things that's come is that the bar has thought, well, we can't just sit here and let it happen to us. We're going to have to be forward thinking, and I think chambers are forward thinking. You know, things like cybercrime, things like that. I think lots of chambers are trying to get ahead of the game on things like that. Terrorism, you know, 5 years ago there was a big vogue, and there still is, about prosecuting and defending in sex cases, and so people have thought, right, I'm going to channel my energy into that. I don't feel that the future is negative at all.